And so I'll edit this a little bit. Maybe. Why is it blurred out? There we go. I don't hear an echo. I can see you. I think I see this. Courtney, welcome to the Moonlander podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Courtney, and I've known John for going a little over 2 years now, and I'm happy to join your podcast.
Well, thank you. And we have our own little podcast that we're going to improve by, I think, using slides. I'm going to introduce myself real fast, even though I did it in the previous video. There were technical difficulties because I'm a newbie. So the most important thing in my life is I'm a father. So I have a son. He's 10 years old in 3 days. He thinks he's already 20. The second most important thing is I feel like, it's important to me is I'm a field investigator from MUFON and recently advanced to assistant state director because State Director Melanie Young, found value in my participation. And I'm grateful to all the people that I know and I've interacted with there. I also work at a community mental health clinic, and so I think I'm capable of speaking on mental health to the degree that I do. I think Courtney will vouch for me that I tend to probably know more than I need to do just to do what we do. But I've been working in mental health since, since 2012, graduating, and all my life, if you count being born into my family. I worked at a airline for 24 years. I was a past aircraft mechanic for a little bit, not at the airlines. I was a music major. I crewed for balloons and rode in them sometimes to be on site to help pack up. I've been skydiving, scuba diving. I've been all around the world, and I love UFOs, movies, ghosts, all kinds of things. Sound pretty good? Good intro? It's going to have to be. Why didn't that advance? And no. So, technical difficulties all the time. Okay. Can you still see like you could see?
Yes.
Okay. This episode, version 2, You Are Not Crazy for Believing in Aliens. I'm going to introduce Courtney to some pictures she's probably not seen. If you've seen them, great. It doesn't mean that you haven't, but I do like it when a large group does it so I can see what they know and what I know and how much I'm confabulating or making bigger than it needs to be. I'm just that kind of guy. I'd like to introduce first mental health in terms of thinking about it in a new way. Don't think about it as a deficiency or that you're lacking something. Consider it in terms of functioning. When we're functioning well, we're usually functioning well in more than one domain. And when we're having a crisis, we tend to cease to function well in multiple domains. And so if you can function in one domain and you can survive in that until you get back on your feet and get some other domains running, you're doing pretty good. It's when you can't get any domain to work or being able to work in any domain is when we are having problems. In terms of UFOs and cryptids, I put it on a continuum here. Continuum's a great way to think about it because there does seem to be a continuum between nuts and bolts and kind of, spiritual and or more anomalous, and it doesn't quite fit the world as we understand it. And it could be we just don't understand the world. Jack Valet certainly puts everything on the spectrum, and I'm going to try to demonstrate how that it is a spectrum. It's not just physical reality and something archetypal, which is something Carl Jung would push. Clearly, if there's UFOs and their craft, they're going to be aliens, and aliens aren't necessarily ghosts or spiritual. But when you consider that we're human beings and we get in cars and drives, you don't consider us spiritual either. So, however, there is some evidence in, well, maybe there are stories in the lore about how there are entities that are non-corporal beings. They're manifestations of mind. And it could be that some of the things that are ghost related or Bigfoot related could be either holographically presented or telepathically pushed into our brain so that we are not seeing reality as we imagine. MUFON, as a field investigator, we're not investigating the cryptids, the Bigfoots, the ghosts. We're only focusing on the UFO reports. That fellow there pointing to the UFO, he calls MUFON, leaves a report. Someone gets that assigned to them. They go out and they talk to them. They're not trying to do anything other than get the facts and get them straight. It doesn't matter. It does matter the validity of the person, but mental health doesn't mean, if you have a mental health problem, it doesn't mean that you didn't see something any more than you don't have a problem. You did see something. The sanest of us can look at Venus and kind of misinterpret that as something else, and I myself have certainly done that. MUFON is a organization that's been around since the 60s. It's their mission statement is probably better than any I've ever heard, short of Star Trek's. Star Trek's mission, everyone knows, is that 5-year mission to boldly go where no one has gone before. Well, this is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. If we can figure out how UFOs fly and do the things, we're going to change the world. We will probably make it a lot like Star Trek. That doesn't say that MUFON hasn't put Bigfoot in the journal. This was 1921 or 22. And at that time, when I was in the organization, they were starting to push more strongly towards just nuts and bolts. If we do get a Bigfoot or something sighting, that usually gets bumped over to our peers over at Opus and other organizations that deal more with this. We do have an ERT experiencer group that they will deal with people who report seeing aliens, and so we kind of sort it by what looks like aliens driving vehicles versus the paranormal. I have been a fan of Bigfoot since this episode of $6 Million Man, and of course since Spock has done In Search of and the Bigfoot episode. I particularly like this episode because it introduces aliens, and Bigfoot is an android, not an apparition or a paranormal being. What's interesting most to me about this episode is it touches on the anomalous rating scale, which I'm going to introduce you to with this picture. What interests you about this picture, Courtney?
Oh, Bigfoot is actually carrying
Steve Austin. Yep.
Steve Austin. Okay, I don't think I'm
$6 Million Man. You could have either one, but it's a tunnel of light. Where else have you heard about the tunnel of light?
When you die.
Yeah, exactly. And so in this episode, they make a barrier that you have to cross, and most people can't get through the barrier. But it's interesting enough that Jack Valet on the anomalous rating scale puts NDEs and ghost and religious experiences and out-of-body experiences all on the same scale. Most people have not heard of the anomalous rating scale, but we have heard of the close encounter scales. Do you remember the movie that Spielberg did with that title?
The Close Encounter of the Third Kind?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. You got it. So here's the close encounter scale in terms of the Steve Austin episode. He finds footprints that look like Bigfoot. He follows them. So that's the physical effect. That's close encounter 2. Being observed. He looks around. He thinks he's being observed. He sees Bigfoot in the trees. There you go. That's close encounters of the third kind. He's abducted and carried through the tunnel. Was he injured? Well, he was in a pretty good fight, knocked unconscious, so probably. And So this is bigger than what most people think. And Jacques Vallée is probably one of the most prominent figures still in UFO, as a ufologist, was one of the characters in there, or at least the French character was supposed to be Jacques Vallée. So if you're interested in more kind of accumulation of evidence that these two things may be related, Leslie Kean wrote her book on UFOs and surviving death that do suggest on both of them that there's a correlation somehow, and we just don't understand the full picture yet. Are you ready for a pop quiz?
I'll do my best.
Okay, you're now a field investigator. What is this?
Something related to Star Trek?
That's probably the best answer so far. Most people go right to Enterprise, but it's not really the Enterprise as you remember it from the original series, is it?
No.
What's different about it? Can you tell me?
The body of the aircraft?
Fair enough. The fuselage is different, and the warp nacelles are connected with, they're more squared off as opposed to at an angle. If you had said the Enterprise, I would have asked you what evidence do you have for that, because there's nothing written on the ship that indicates that it's 1701 or NCC Enterprise, that kind of stuff. What we can tell is this is an Ambassador class starship if you're familiar with Star Trek lore, and it was in 2 episodes, Cause and Effect, and the lower one is Yesterday's Enterprise. I just happen to like this ship, but also I wanted to kind of make fun of the fact that sometimes you will get something like this picture, and we have had the Enterprise loaded up to our computer, and someone has said they've seen this. Does that mean they're crazy? Well,
No.
nope. I agree with you. Sometimes, let's say that this is the only thing that you know, and you see a flying saucer, and your brain just fills in the rest, making the fuselage and warp nacelle theirs. I don't know. I could see that happening. It doesn't mean you're crazy to see what's fully not there. And just because you see something doesn't mean you didn't see. You may not have seen what you think you saw, but you also didn't see nothing. It can be complicated. And our brains can blow up information to make something else look like it's there. And of course, the tie-in with I'm listening. This is Frasier, of course, and he's the captain in Cause and Effect. Back to that point, though, with you don't always see what's there. There's a story of the natives seeing Columbus's ships approaching, and they couldn't see them. They saw clouds. The shaman of the day hung out on the beach for supposedly 2 or 3 days before the ship's sails manifested as cells, and he realized they were about to meet some strangers. No one else believed them. He kept pointing, well, look, you see this? You see this? Nobody could see it but the shaman. Now, there's some articles that you can find that suggest this is a myth, and I would suggest to you it is not. From studies in sociology, reading anthropology books, anthropologists would go into the field carrying Polaroids. They'd introduce people to cameras by taking pictures of them and showing them instant photos. No one could see themselves in the photo. They couldn't identify their friends in the photo until they were educated as to how this thing works and how it looks. It takes a while to translate that information when you've never been exposed. And I will demonstrate that further on by suggesting some correspondence with other images that just hang in. We're gonna question our own vision here pretty soon. As for the Enterprise, some folks question that it being in here, but I'm going to touch on Star Trek a lot. Some of it because I'm going to hint at there may be a soft disclosure program going on, and there may be other links to non-human entities, and the goal of this is kind of to say you're not crazy for believing in aliens. and non-human intelligence may be more abundant than what you've imagined. And I'm going to show multiple ways for you to consider that possibility. All right. Do you recognize this image from a medieval painting?
I recognize the lady. I don't recognize the part that it's emphasizing.
Okay. So what's interesting about this photo is it has a UFO on it. It's a medieval painting. It suggests that they've been seeing UFOs when, and that was on Ancient Aliens. There's quite a few medieval paintings that suggest the same thing. Academics would say this is God or a representation of God. However, most people having spiritual experiences don't have other people encountering the same thing simultaneously. And so what's interesting is in the bottom corner is there's a guy and his dog both looking at the object. That means everybody was seeing this. Everybody and their dog was seeing this. And so if this is God, my question to academics comes from Star Trek. Excuse me. What does God need with a starship? So I don't practice Santeria. What I do practice is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. What is crazy? Go, you're on.
Crazy is something that's not considered normal.
Okay, I would say crazy is our colloquialism for saying something's not right, but it's not a mental health disorder. It is just a lay term that we use. Do you know what normal is?
Um,
Does this book define normal?
Does what boat?
The book, DSM-5.
Oh, the book. Sorry, I thought you said boat.
Books.
Um, that wasn't normal, was it?
That's okay. It's not a Freudian slip, I don't think.
I guess so. um, is this book
The
normal?
DSM-5 doesn't define normal. How does it define disorders if it doesn't know what normal is?
Um, because based on societal norms, I guess it would be considered not normal.
You're right. There's a cultural component to disorders, and folks don't necessarily believe that. But I'm going to give you references that you can explore this if you don't believe so. Do dogs see God?
I think dogs see things we can't see.
I actually concur with that. Can you use the DSM-5 to study dogs and give them a
No.
mental health disorder? No. So normal is is relative. Do you know anyone on this graph, on this continuum?
Yes.
Which one? We'll go there first. Unless you want me to just guide.
So the one on the very right with Jamie Foxx
Mm-hmm.
and it almost looks
Yep.
can't remember his name.
Jamie Lee Foxx, Robert Downey Jr. This movie is called The Soloist. Did you see it?
Yes, Robert Downey Jr. A long time ago.
A long time ago. This is the worst case scenario for someone with having schizophrenia. Jamie Foxx plays a real person who has schizophrenia. He was a famous celloist. He was, I think they considered him a genius, but he fell off the map because he had a break with reality and he couldn't recover. He was living on the streets when Robert Downey Jr.'s characters found him. Above and over one is A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe and Jennifer Connelly.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, and so he had a better outcome. Not everybody ends up homeless with schizophrenia, but I doubt anyone has this Hollywood ending where, oh, I'm delusional because I can tell that my hallucinations haven't aged in 20 years. Kind of a nice out, but it usually doesn't happen that way. What's interesting is that his delusion also helped him solve a math problem that no one else could solve, which ended him getting the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah. Do you know Philip K. Dick?
No.
All right. What's really interesting about him is he wrote some fabulous pieces of fiction. You've probably seen a movie with him, Minority Report and
Yeah.
Total Recall.
Yep.
Well, he had schizophrenia, or at least he was so diagnosed. Now, sometimes he gave lectures saying that he had popped into different realities, and that's pretty interesting. But the voice that started it for him was his son had just came home from the hospital after being born, and a voice told him, "Take your son to the hospital, or he will die." Well, when I hear that voice, I'm going to follow instructions. And so did Philip K. Dick. He took this baby back to the hospital, and they actually found something wrong with him. And had he not had emergency surgery, he would have died. That's interesting. Um, if it's useful information, why would we label it schizophrenia? Unless they just didn't know anything else to label it, and they gave him that. Was he functioning? I don't know. He's pretty successful. So we're going to jump to the other side and start with Jennifer Shaffer and Richard Martini. Jennifer is a medium. She gets paid to interact with people, and she gives them information about deceased loved ones and spirit guides and that kind of information. She seems to be doing pretty well at it. She's, per her own website and Richard Martini, she's worked with law enforcement to solve crimes. She seems to be doing pretty well. Richard Martini met up with her after doing some research on Michael Newton. He wanted to determine whether or not this book, Journey of Souls, and Michael Newton was on the up and up, and he decided that they were actually getting information that was new through hypnosis, and that they were confirming that there was what looks like an afterlife. He has a podcast called It's a Wonderful Afterlife. I highly recommend it. And so these next three that I introduced, the two bottom one, of course, Jennifer Love Lewis, and the other lady that plays the medium, they talk to ghosts. I just threw them on there for kind of connecting this dot. They're not real mediums, but they play one on TV. But above them are real mediums. So the one closer to A Beautiful Mind, that is Ingo Swann. He worked for the government for like 20-something years as a paid psychic spy. I find that pretty interesting. Above him is Chico, or Francisco Xavier. He was a spiritist in Brazil and a well-known psychic. No one seemed to doubt his ability. And I recommend the movie that portrays his life if you can find it. And then we have The Sleeping Prophet, which is Edgar Cayce. You know Edgar Cayce?
Hmm.
Well, he's
Uh,
America's famous prophet. He was telling all kinds of things and helping people heal. And it started early for him by putting his book under his pillow and reading the book while he slept. Pretty interesting. I wish I could do that. Um, this may seem tangent, but I'm going to bring it back together here. There are people who have had injuries that have had near-death experience, like Daniel Brinkley and the lady down below, Elizabeth Crone, who was also struck by lightning. Fortunately for her, she was struck at a synagogue, and inside the synagogue, you can bet there were no shortage of doctors, and they all rushed out and they saved her and brought her back to this world. And she's like, "Why did you do that?" Because the other world's kind of pleasant, from what I hear. And they both came back with abilities like healing and insight that goes beyond our normal insight, and maybe even accessing spirit guides. Now, above them is Orlando Cyril. I'm not quite sure, but he had a traumatic brain injury, and it resulted in him having abilities that he did not have previously. This phenomenon is known as acquired sudden savant syndrome. It's literally people who have never played the piano before become concert pianists, or they become amazing artists. It's peculiar. We don't have an explanation for it. No one does. And I'm kind of jealous because I know that the moment I have a TBI or a stroke, I'm going to be drooling like this guy in the wheelchair, Captain Pike from Star Trek. Not able to speak just yes or no from the machine. So Allan Kardec is a spiritist, and he introduced the word medium. They were interacting with spirits and spirit guides to determine how we can help humanity evolve, and I participate in this. I also find that I'm not the only one. So the presence of other worlds, the psychological and spiritual findings of Emanuel Swedenborg. Emanuel Swedenborg was a scientist and not a spiritist, but he did believe in a spiritual world that was interacting with us simultaneously, and he had access for whatever reason, and he was probably the best known scientist we had at that time. In the 1800s, Van Dusen was studying him, and then he writes this book, and he talks about his own cases where there were people that were hospitalized for mental health reasons, and he would interview the hallucinations, not the people that were hospitalized. And what he found was that many times the hallucinations themselves were multiple significant education levels above the person that was hospitalized. So say the person was hospitalized had a 6th grade education, but he's interviewing hallucinations that have a PhD level education. And he recorded the conversations. Like the people would say, I don't understand what they're telling me. And he would ask, well, just tell me and then I'll translate it for you. And it was clear that they were getting information that they shouldn't have, or at least shouldn't have access to, based on what we understand about personality.
Can you go back for just a second? I'm
Sure.
going to write down the name of the book.
If you like, I will give you a copy of this,
Okay.
and then you'll have access to the whole thing. And at the end, there are also links to, I think, everything that I've brought up here is here somewhere. So
That would be cool if you could put the links of the books.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'll do that for you. Um, and I think they're on the slide. That the book links may not be. I may need to go and add those. But thank you for reminding me to do that. So medium versus mental health. I'm going back to my first definition. Functional is the key to diagnosing. The people that have good hallucinations, they're not coming into my office. They're not coming in and say, well, my grandmother told me I did a good job yesterday. And I'm like, yeah, you want that to go away? No, not really. Kind of like talking to her when I need to. I'm like, well, yeah, so let's leave it at that. The people that come to us usually have scary stuff, or they can't function because they've become a bit paranoid that everyone's out to get them because they can't trust their own voice in their head. With that, what I'd like to kind of point out is that all of us need 2 wings, a right wing and a left wing, to go straight. If the bird folds up one wing, what happens to it, Courtney?
It goes sideways.
It goes in a spiral and falls out of the sky.
Yeah, it goes sideways.
Yeah. And if you have a rowboat and you only use one row, you're going to go in circles.
Circles, yeah.
So the hemispheres here are mixed up on purpose because the left side controls the right side of the body, and the right side controls the left side of the body. And what's cool about that, I thought it was the next slide, but maybe it'll come up, is there's a study that shows that when they separated the corpus callosum, it looked like the person was severed into 2 personalities. The left hemisphere was the person that we know, and the right hemisphere was somebody radically different that nobody had ever met before. And that fascinates me. And of course, everyone debates it's not really 2 personalities, but I don't know what else you would call it. What's really interesting is that the left hemisphere always lied. More specifically, a medical term called confabulation. And confabulation is a lie. It's inaccurate, but it's not manipulative. It's not to get a point across. So, for example, they figured out how to talk to the right brain and the left brain separately. So the left brain didn't know what the right brain was seeing or thinking. All right, and so they could talk to the left brain, and the left brain could talk out the mouth, but the right had to draw or write the answer with the left hand. And so they gave 2 images, a hammer to the left brain and a saw to the right brain. And they asked the left brain to say what he sees, and it left says, I see a hammer, which is what they showed to the left brain. But the right brain got a saw, and the left hand drew a saw, and they asked the left brain, why did you draw a saw then? And the left brain said, because it's in the toolbox, or something like that. It never said, I don't know. It always gave an answer that made sense to the left brain, but it was never accurate. So, Western mind emphasizes rationality over all things. What if we are a little bit crazy because we've divorced ourselves from the emotional, spiritual side of our brains, and we're just not acting right? And so the Eastern world, they're more abstract, and they like things like conundrums. Well, like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? If we were to merge scientific mind and Eastern mind together, we may fly straight again. That's kind of where that was going to go with. So do you see or hear things that others don't? Some of the common things that could lead to hallucinations is PTSD, major depression, bipolar, schizoaffective, schizophrenia, substance use, or combinations of the above. Sometimes you can have hallucinations and we don't know what's going on, and we'll call that psychosis NOS, or not otherwise specified. You could have no identified disorder. You could be perfectly fine and you're just seeing things. We don't know why. You could just be normal unspecified. I don't know. I made that one up. That doesn't exist. I just thought that'd get Courtney to laugh, and she's not laughing. Hypnagogic hallucinations are the most common forms of hallucinations. You're more likely to experience one of these going to sleep or coming out of sleep. And if I interviewed 80% of the population, that's what I'm going to find.
I feel like you're missing one good one.
Tell me, please.
Stress.
Stress can make you hallucinate.
I really feel like it can. Like you're really stressed and then you start
Yeah,
hearing.
I don't see why not. That certainly people who were having accidents or severe accidents or war injuries have certainly had experiences, and sometimes it saved their lives. Sometimes it probably, I guess we don't hear about the ones that didn't.
Even
Yeah,
I feel like if it's not traumatic stress, just stress in general if it gets too overwhelming.
yeah. I've had a Charlie horse send me out of my body. Um, Man, that hurt. And then the next thing I know, I'm standing beside myself, and I'm like, that's interesting. And then once the pain went away, I was back to normal, and it was kind of interesting.
But go on. Yes.
All right. So, do you hear or see things others don't? Well, do you actually see what is really there? So, did the cat jump at a snake or a cucumber? I don't know.
The world will never know.
Yeah, the world will never know. Um, did you know the flea experiment? Do you know anything about that?
You
Okay, so,
may have to jog my memory.
all right. So they put fleas in a jar, and apparently fleas can jump out of a jar. They got a pretty good jump on them, right? And so they put the fleas back in the jar, and they closed the lid on it, and it's a glass lid. They can't see the lid, but they, after bumping their head on them for a while, they decided that they didn't like bumping their head, and so they started jumping below the threshold of, or the ceiling. All right. After a while, you can take the lid off. They will never jump out of the jar because they've learned there's a lid there, and they will not undo it. What also is interesting is their children, their offspring, will not jump above the ceiling.
I think I've heard
Trauma,
that before.
trauma will be passed genetically. Epigenetics means that we pass things on without verbal transmission. And so it just makes you wonder how many of us are limited in our abilities, one, because we've been told to, and one, because we've been conditioned by the world that we live in, which is also the social world, which is why you made that excellent point that mental health is limited to cultural phenomenons and expectations. Think about this too. Traumas teach us faster than learning a skill. So, for example, you usually only have to touch a fire once. You've learned that's hot. You're not going to touch that a second time on purpose. But learning to undo that so that even though you know that you're not going to get harmed, let's say that you have a magic glove, you're probably going to be you're going to be reluctant to put your hand back in the fire even though you know you're protected. Or even if someone said, no, this one's a holographic fire, it won't burn you. That's interesting to me. Because if that's true, what if all illnesses are psychosomatic? That means that our illnesses are actually due to our belief systems and not necessarily due to a physical thing. That doesn't mean that there aren't physical things. I'm not certainly suggesting that, except for this. One of the reasons or pharmaceuticals will do triple blind studies to rule out placebo is because sometimes you give somebody a sugar pill and they get better. Doesn't that mean it was all in the mind? So, what about multiple personality disorders, which I think is a still viable term for a disorder, but we've changed it to DID. So, is multiple personality disorder an hallucination? Courtney?
I wouldn't say it was.
I agree. I think having multiple personalities and hearing them isn't the same as having an hallucination of something that's outside of yourself, even though you could probably even see your multiple personalities manifest in the real world because your brain can overlap it into the visual field. What's interesting to me about this is that when they put people that had this disorder into a functional magnetic resonance imaging system, an fMRI, and the person changed personalities. Let's say they went from a seeing person to a nearsighted person. The eye actually changed shape to make the eye nearsighted so that the person needed glasses. And so if the personality can have that much effect on the body, does that explain a pathway for understanding how placebos work? Let's say that you have versions of yourself going from childhood to present, and it's a continuum. It's not like you just jump from one to one. And so there could be a personality prior to you or after you that doesn't have the illness, and you just switch to that. Because if multiple personalities are hallucinations, then I have to ask the question, are you a hallucination? So here's this picture again. We brought them all together. Do you hear and see what others don't? Well, do you actually see the world in real time? There's evidence that you do not. And so here's the split brain study. I just got ahead of myself, and we talked about that. And this book is one of the great places to have for a resource. It talks about this and several other things. Who's in Charge by Michael Gazzaniga. He's a neurologist, and he's in one of the colleges in California, universities. He comes across in this book as being very... I had a problem with the book in terms of I'm biased towards there's a spiritual life, and he's pretty much of the opinion consciousness is an hallucination of the mind, and that the mind creates consciousness and it emerges from brain. Where I'm of the opinion consciousness is the base reality, and physical life emerges from that. And so we're on two different pages. That doesn't mean that just because I disagree that I didn't like this book. This book is brilliant in terms of the science that's presented, and the split brain is one of them. Do you see time in real time? Well, the studies show that we do not. We're anywhere from 80 milliseconds to 3 to 10 whole seconds prior to consciousness is when things happen. I don't know if I buy the 10 seconds. It depends on which study you're reading, but 3 seconds was a solid hit on some of them. But 80 milliseconds seems to be where most decisions are made. And so they put people in fMRIs, and they were watching them do tasks. They had a thing that they had to unpack in front of them, or a computer selections process. And the person over there in the lab could tell what they were going to decide before they knew what they've decided. So the brain takes in information from multiple places, it puts it together, and it hands it up. It's like watching a football game. If you're watching a football game on TV, there's a time delay between that scene that you're watching and cheering for. People have already cheered for it somewhere else, right? And in addition to that, we also can demonstrate by if you touch the tip of your finger, you can feel that, right? And you can feel your nose being touched, but the circuit from the nerves from your nerve to your brain is shorter than your finger to your brain. And so when you touch your nose and finger at the same time, why do you feel it simultaneously even though you know there's a delay? Sound goes slower than sight. You should see me talking to you before you hear my voice, but they're always synced up. So our brain is doing stuff and then handing it up to us. That much is sure. Are you your memory?
In what sense of?
Well, who you are is affected by memory. You're influenced by memory, but you're not your memory, are you?
No.
No, your memories could be wrong. Um, so we daydream. We have REM dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Our personalities are they the same in waking life, dream life, and daydream life? Is that a continuum?
Never thought about it.
Have you been somebody different in your dream?
No.
No, you've always been you?
Yes.
Okay. But you've had dream characters in your dreams.
Yes.
Non-family? Anyone like you don't know? You remember having dreams of people you don't know?
Yes.
Yeah. Are they fully fledged characters or are they two-dimensional abstract things invented on the fly?
Mm. No, I feel like it's like a full character, like something I'd watched out of a movie.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with you. I practice lucid dreaming. I've had lucid dreams and interaction with people in my dreams, and they're solid personalities. They're not like two-dimensional. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean they aren't two-dimensional in the background, or I just didn't get close to them. Is this multiple personalities? And so our brains are actually personality simulators. Everybody you've ever seen on television or in real life, they're in your head. Um, characters from books, people that you've made up, they're all real personalities. And the computer, your brain, puts these together so that you can run simulations so that you can predict what people are going to do or not do. And anytime someone gets out of character, like maybe House on the House MD breaks into an English accent, he is actually English, but everyone sees him as American, and then they're like, wait, did he just break character? Or if he did something nice, then it'd be like, you can't do that. And so multiple personalities, dream characters, archetypes, memes, tropes, aliens, ghosts, angels, demons, topos, maybe they're all in our head. So does it matter that they're real or not real in the sense that they don't have a body? They certainly influence your mind if they're in there. Does the subconscious count as a personality? That personality, or I would say the subconscious has more power than our conscious mind, as evidenced by you can be hypnotized to believe things and do things and feel things. I've seen people hypnotized and given birth without medication. I've seen people poked with pins and they didn't bleed. I saw people told that they were burned with cigarettes and they got whelps on their arms in perfect circular fashion that looked like someone burned them with a cigarette. That was all mind. So if the brain can't distinguish between an imagined event and a real one, why is there any debate over whether or not there's non-human intelligence? Shall we continue? Do you need a break?
Maybe a quick break.
Do you?
Are you asking me if I need a break?
Yeah.
No, not really. Go ahead.
Okay. Pop quiz. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Who's this? Oh my God! You're
I
not a
know
Star
who it
Trek fan.
is. His name isn't popping up. Hold on.
John Delancey from Star Trek. He plays the character Q, in this episode he tells Jean-Luc Picard, "You're dead, Jean-Luc." Um, he is a non-corporal being that's interfacing with the Enterprise. All right, he is pure mind. He has a body only because he chooses to have a body, and that's evident in multiple episodes. And like he wants in this episode, he tells Picard, "If I'd known you were such a ladies' man, I would have shown up as a girl." Do you know this character? Okay, well he's a Q2. He was in the movie James Bond, and multiple ones. He was the guy that created things, and I always wondered, does he just is he just a genius, or is he downloading information? Why is this character called Q? I'm interested in that. And there may not be a correlation between this Q and that Q, except for the next slide that's coming up. Do you know who made James Bond show? Who wrote that? Do I need to call your husband in here?
Probably.
Ian Fleming wrote the James Bond series, and he also wrote the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang story. Did you know that?
Nope.
Did you see the musical?
Nope.
No? If you didn't see the musical, I know you didn't read the book. But Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond stories, wrote this kid book about this car. And this car is a genie, not Genesis 11. That is Gen E, Genii. This was a living car. It was possessed by the mind of a jinn. Did you know that? And so, if you add David Grush's story about we've known about UFOs since 1930s, and that more than one congressman is running around right now with their like chickens with their head cut off, saying they're interdimensional. Well, I don't know what interdimensional is unless that's ghost or jinn. They've known about this for a while, right? Is this soft disclosure? Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the story behind the movie, may be based on a true story, and I don't think this car guy knows the half of it, because here is the Men in Black. Are they archetypes? Are they tropes? How come they show up every time a UFO comes into being? Are they time travelers? So archetypes refer to a role. Like Dorothy and Luke, they're both the same character, right? They both start off on the farm with their aunt and uncle. That's the trope. They both go on a journey. Trope. Even though it says here that tropes refer to the personality, where the archetype is a role. Tropes tend to be things that you can predict are going to happen, not just because of personality, but because of things going on. So Han Solo, Luke and Dorothy both go on their journey, right? And they find a sorcerer or witch to teach them. That's a role. That's the archetype. The sorcerer, Glinda is the witch, and Obi-Wan. They both teach them the powers within them, not external to them. All right? Han Solo, Cowardly Lion, always running away from a fight, both of them. R2-D2, Toto, can't speak a lick of English, but they run and ask for help. Tin Man, C-3PO, can you see Glinda? Or can you see the witch telling Dorothy, Glinda didn't tell you what happened to your mother, did she, Dorothy? Join me and we can rule Emerald City as mother and daughter. Ruby lightsaber, ruby slippers. Oz must be the evil emperor. Who else would ask a 9-year-old girl to go kill a witch unless he needed a new apprentice? And you've got to start them early. Yoda, never your mind on where you were or what you were doing. Adventure, over the rainbow, Jedi's crave not these things. All of us are affected by archetypes, tropes, memes. And so if you think of TV programming as memes, programming, well, is it soft disclosure? I don't think that means what you think it means, John. So, do you know this guy? Probably not. He's a UFO guy, and I'm still introducing you to UFO people, so I'm not picking on you. But this is Gary Nolan. He's probably one of the greatest inventors of our time right now. He's got hundreds of patents, making lots of money, making stuff, fixing stuff in science. And he's talking about downloads. Tesla talked about downloads. He's the other guy that I kind of partial to. This guy, Michael Tabot, wrote this book, The Holographic Universe, where everything is connected. And if we all came from one point, like a black hole, a singularity, the Big Bang, at one point all the matter that was touching, and so why wouldn't we be kind of all entangled? What's interesting about this is supposedly he is rumored to have gotten this entire book from a download. And so a download is an alien or spiritual entity giving human information to help modify the world in some fashion or form. This is James Fox. He is a ufologist. He researches UFOs. His last one that I think came out was the one about the UFO in Brazil. I thought he was the inspiration for the guy on the right, Mulder, Fox Mulder from the X-Files. Apparently, well, it's James Fox, Fox Mulder, that made sense to me. But we got the Night Stalker, and supposedly the Night Stalker was the first real field investigator that also influenced or did influence the X-Files. Take note of the lightning. I always find lightning interesting. We're going to come back to that. This guy was captured with a film on photo in 1939 with a UFO behind him. I'm not sure if that is a cigar-shaped craft or a flying saucer, but it's got a little bit of a rise to it, but that could just be the way the light and shadows falling. This photo stuck because of the UFO, but it also caught me interested because he's smoking a cigarette. And it makes me wonder if you know about the X-File, Courtney. We also have the cigarette-smoking man. The more memes you can remember, the more likely you can know if you're being activated or deactivated. And so a well-educated mind isn't just words. You've got to know symbols, and you've got to be looking for themes and patterns, archetypes and tropes, and we've got to look. All right, this photo is another UFO one taken in 1942. Definitely looks like a flying saucer. And do you see the lady pointing at him?
Mm-hmm.
The only thing she's missing is a dog. This is Kenneth Arnold. This is the UFO that he first saw, and he is the person who supposedly influenced the world into using the word flying saucers. He did not say he saw flying saucers. He said this thing skipped like a saucer jumping over a water puddle, or it was like skipping. And so a news reporter put flying saucer in his thing, and it went viral. That was viral before there was a word viral. And makes me wonder, did it go viral because everybody's been seeing these? You know? Do you see what I see? This is a book by Russell Targ. I'm going to show the full picture later on. It's Memoirs of a Blind Biker. Russell Targ was essentially the guy that created and put the protocols with the team all together to do psychic remote viewing. And so it wasn't just him, it was the whole team, but he was central to this. And I like the title because, one, it reminds me of a Christmas song, but also we keep asking people, do you see things and hear things that others don't? Don't we all have our own memes, our own ways of seeing? And so do we share the same thing? Is this really a consensus reality? Just something to think about. So Jack Parsons, not the Alan Parsons Project, was part of NASA, and he was an occultist. He liked magic. He liked thinking about esoteric stuff, and a bit odd. But it's also odd that he and other folks from Germany were brought into NASA to put us into space. It's just an interesting point, and you can read more about that in American Cosmic. You know this show?
I Dream of Jeannie.
I know. Do you remember the characters? Jeannie and Major Nelson?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, NASA puts Major Nelson into space. He lands on an island. He finds a gin, and the chaos ensues over a couple episodes or seasons, two or three seasons. I don't know how many seasons, but when you cook connect that with the Germans that were part of the Operation Paperclip brought into NASA to put us into space, and Jack Parsons, are we really talking about there's something else up there? There's something else involved. Ian Fleming going all the way back to the 30s. This is Chris Bledsoe. And again, I'm sorry if I'm pushing too fast, Courtney. I,
No,
I
you're fine.
like I like asking folks to see. And then when we had the meeting, there's like 25. I don't think there was only one photo that didn't get anybody to say, "Oh, I know what that is," which is interesting because it also shows that I'm on the same page and I'm thinking right. But this is a meme in my head. Jeff Bledsoe had an experience way back in the day, and MUFON was involved, and they had their parting of ways, and I think they're okay now, but NASA's involved with him. CIA was involved with him. FBI is involved with him. This is well documented in his book. And he was seeing not just, he didn't see flying saucers, he saw orbs, and he saw beings like this lady in white, which he's painted. And he suggested they were like Egyptian gods, like Hathor was talking to him. But in talking to, so in one of his stories he shares on a podcast, top NASA guy comes and puts a piece of a crashed UFO in his head, and he has a reaction to it, which confirms to the NASA guy that Chris Bledsoe's on the up and up. And in a conversation they had, the NASA guy said everybody they put into space has brought something back, either a hitchhiker or a ghost, a poltergeist, something. That, I want to know more about that. I have questions about this. This is Dr. Deanna Posaka. She wrote the book American Cosmic. She outlines all of this stuff with NASA and tells you, like, they still put plaques on things they launched into space, even today, even satellites. And they have ancient prayers written in Old Greek. Why would you do that? Why spend all the money in a clean room to make this thing perfectly clean and its weight and balance, and you put a placard on it just to appease an old god, unless there's something there that they have to navigate or interact with? American Cosmic's her book. UFO of God is Chris Bledsoe's book. And this is Russell Targ. I really want to know what the cat's name is. I'm dying to know the cat's name. Anyone, leave it in the comments. I want to know. Did you know this character from Ghostbuster was supposed to be based on Russell Targ? Yeah. Nobody. Well, you got to know Russell Targ to get the joke. and so that's kind of a rare, obscure way to sneak in a meme. And the Psychic Spies did come up with ghosts and aliens and just weird stuff, right? Do you hear things and see things that people don't? What if I told you everyone's a medium or psychic, but we've been told so often that the ceiling is lower that we've learned not to jump too high? This person is Maria Orsic. The little symbol is the lightning strike that signified her branch of working with the Nazis, essentially. They were channeling aliens, coming up with blueprints of UFOs. And supposedly that's how the Germans got theirs, as opposed to crashed ships like the one in Italy that apparently the Americans captured. So that pattern looks like this pattern here from Star Trek. Maybe I'm just seeing things, but I see these patterns a lot. This book here is called Alien Interview, and the person who's a nurse had a telepathic link with one of the aliens. Pretty sure it was a gray. It was an android, and the person running the android, the soul operating the android, identified as female. That's pretty significant coming from a book in the 50s or 60s, from the story that originated in the 50s or 60s. And they belong to a group of people called the Domain. And supposedly there's a galactic federation here in this galaxy, but the Domain has been moving in. I'm not sure who the good guys or bad guys are in this picture. This this alien didn't seem too bad, but this character that she met, this alien, suggested we don't know our history at all, and she gave our history in part or to this lady, and it's in the book. What's interesting about this to me is also, and very specifically, the sign that she gave for the domain. Does that look familiar to you? The private property, the domain, that symbol that looks like kind of a chevron or an A inside a circle.
It looks like the one on
Say it.
the suits in Star Trek. You know, the
My God,
emblem.
you won! You won the prize!
The emblem. There you go.
How is that not the same?
Hmm.
And if that's true, and we did capture the domain people and not the Federation people, we'd know more about the domain than the Federation, right? And so, I don't know. That's one avenue to go with it. But even as Maria was channeling aliens, supposedly Gene Roddenberry was also in a think tank with people who were mediums, and they were channeling aliens. They called their group the Council of Nine. And so this Council of Nine was giving them information, and supposedly Star Trek all came from those meetings.
Hmm.
So if this is just fiction, why did Space Force adopt a symbol that looks a lot like Star Trek? This guy was the Israeli Space Defense Force Minister, top guy. He's bigger than David Grush in terms of position in hierarchy, and he became a whistleblower in 2018 when he said, there's a Galactic Federation, they're here. They think we're too immature to interact with at this time, except for the fact that the U.S. government and military are in cahoots with these aliens. I don't know. Galactic Federation seems real to me, especially when you have the Chinese lander rover and their National Space Agency symbol that looks exactly like the chevron and the Starfleet symbol. That can't be a coincidence. All the Space Force agencies have a chevron symbol. Why? Is there one Space Force and we're already one world, and everything else that we're in right now is just a game of make-believe and ways of running us crazy? I don't know. But speaking of crazy, you know this one? No. This is Jimmy Stewart, and this is a scene from Harvey. Have you seen that movie?
Mm-mm.
No.
I've heard of it, but no.
You need to see this because this is fun, and it's a great movie, and it touches on mental health. What's interesting about this is he's seeing a 6-foot rabbit. And as far as he's concerned, this is a real rabbit. And as you watch the movie, you will become to believe that the rabbit is real. It's not just him. He's hallucinating. The rabbit says he's a puka, which I think in Irish folklore is a ghost or a trickster, or kind of a not always evil, but just not always a friendly spirit. But for whatever reasons, Jimmy Stewart and this rabbit are getting along just fine. All right. What's really interesting is Jimmy Stewart was a really nice guy. He was a general in the Air Force, and back in the day when he walked down the street, they didn't have bodyguards, and people could just come up and talk to you. And he was really nice. He'd talk to people, and invariably he would say, someone would come up and they'd introduce themselves, and he'd say hi, and they'd exchange, and then the person would look down and then kind of him and haw and finally say, well, is he here? And Jimmy would say, is who here? And the person would say, Harvey. Is he with you? And Jimmy Stewart, being the nice guy, didn't tell him that this was just a movie. he said, look, Harvey had to stay home today. He's just feeling a bit under the weather. And the person would brighten up and say, well, because it confirmed his reality, not that Harvey was ill. He said, would next time you see him, would you give him my regards? And then I've had a puka all my life too, and I just really wanted to say hi. And he says, you bet. And so, what is that? Is that mental health? Is that something else? Do we all have access to this, but we block it? I mean, how long do you let your kid talk to the invisible friend? Do you know this movie?
Yep.
Yeah, this one's a bit on the not fun side for me. It's scary, um, but it was interesting, and it's actually kind of a variation of Harvey.
Mm. Is
Um,
that where it came from?
yeah, well, the a totally different storyline, and so in this case, time needs to be reset. He was supposed to have died, and he didn't, and so in this sense, that Puka seems to be trying to correct the timelines to make it right again. If I remember the movie correctly. That has nothing to do with the original Harvey.
Okay.
What do you see in the left image, far left, black and white dots?
Mm, I see a outlining of a lady. It looks like almost.
Okay. Do you see anything inside the dot, the number in the middle?
Do I see anything in it? No.
Yeah, because you're not
It's
Superman. You don't have X-ray vision. You
mhm.
don't see ultralight or ultraviolet, and you don't see infrared, which is outside of our wavelength that we can see. Um, what if I told you the left picture is a hallucination? You're not really seeing the image. Your brain is making it up.
I believe that.
Yeah. Do you see anything in the far right?
No.
Did you ever figure out how to do this? This is a stereoscopic picture, and once you learn to see it, you can usually see it. I don't know if you can see it because of the screen size. That may be too, but the Enterprise is in there. And I wonder how it got in there. um, but this is interesting to me because in that noise, there's a picture. Reality tends to be a wave until you have an observer look at it. All right. Do you know this theory? So you're going to get some science today. So light can be a wave or a particle, a photon or a wave. If it's a wave, it comes through these double slits and it creates an interference pattern where you see bands of light against the screen. All right. But if
Mm-hmm.
you look at it, it becomes a photon, a single photon, and you'll only have one little beam lit up. All right. And
Mm-hmm.
so they are both at the same time until you look at it. An observer changes reality. And so that just boggles the mind, quite frankly, because it, 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 it means that either the light is mechanistic and the observer is doing something that telegraphs information downstream, or light is consciousness and it's aware that someone is looking. I don't know how to sort that, and I know the scientists aren't sorting it that way, but they have sorted it this way. It doesn't matter where you put the observer in this chain or how
Mm-hmm.
far back the light is emitted. They've measured this, and it looks like the light is whether it's going to be light or particle is determined in the past. The present determines your present observation determined the outcome in the past. And try to get your head wrapped around that one. I'll come back to that, and I'll show you why that works. Well, I can tell you this: one way they measured that, besides these elaborate time delayed with lights hitting off mirrors until it gets back to the thing, is
Mm-hmm.
you can do the same split theory with stars. And so let's say the light from a star is passing a black hole, and it
Mm-hmm.
or a large galaxy, and the galaxy is bending the light through a lensing effect, and you're getting one side of the light from the left side and one side from the right or over, and you're getting it from multiple angles, right? And when you
Mm-hmm.
get them to you, if you pass them through the double slit, you'll get the interference pattern, or if you put the observer there, they become the photon. But that means that the light traveling from that star, which could have been 100,000 years
Mm-hmm.
or more, was determined 100,000 years ago, and that that's the only way that they know how to sort it at the moment. And so, in terms of mental health, The Globalization of the American Psyche, Crazy Like Us, is a book worth reading. There are people in the world that have not had conditions that are in the DSM-5, such as Japan didn't have any bulimia patients until an American movie was sent there, and their teenagers in that movie had bulimia, and then suddenly they had 1,000 cases of bulimia at their doorsteps. Bright-sided is also kind of a philosophical, but it touches mental health in the sense that you can be too positive. We're some good, some bad, right? And if all you focus on the positive, you end up having less ability to handle the negative. And also, you need a left hemisphere and right hemisphere to row. You can't just be positive all the time, which is evidenced by Carl Jung saying, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. If you want to get to the light, you've got to run through the shadows. The light's on the other side. So, can you learn to see and hear things that others don't? Think and Grow Rich, original 1937 edition, Napoleon Hill, had this chapter called The Invisible Counselor Technique. You ever read this book?
No.
All right. Well, ask people about this book, because a lot of people have read this book. It's the benchmark. It set the precedence for how all self-help books in terms of finances are going to go. And I have not met one person who's read this book who has told me they also remembered the Invisible Counselor Technique, in which Napoleon Hill thought, I'm not that smart a guy, but I'm going to imagine that I'm sitting in the room with Einstein and Lincoln and all these other people. He put 12 people on his panel, and he'd have this little meditation daydream session, and he'd ask them questions, and he'd get answers. The more he practiced this technique, the more the answers became refined and clearly not his. And then the people started to deviate from his expectations and or his usual tendency to script them. They would do their own thing as if he was actually in an REM dream and he's interacting in a dream as opposed to a daydream. It freaked him out. He quit for a while, but he couldn't deny that the answers he got were helpful, and so he went back to doing it. Isn't that interesting? So this book here, Magic, Mystery, in Tibet, Alexandra David Neal became the first female anthropologist to go to Tibet and interact with the Dalai Lama and other monks so that she could learn more. They let her in because she knew so much about the Buddhism that they were impressed. And so she went there and she was learning stuff. And they have this technique called, they don't call it topomancy, that's a Western version of the word. But a topa is a thought form in which you meditate on the thought form to such a degree that you can hallucinate them and experience it with your senses. So that could be an orange, a spider, a person. And so, for example, if a monk had a fear of spiders, they would have to create a topa of the spider and have it crawl on them until they got used to not being freaked out by the spider. And then they dissolve the spider and they go on with the next thing that they're afraid of, right? Well, Alexandra asked if they could create people, and they said, well, yeah, but we don't recommend it. She said, but you can create people. That means that, yeah, don't really do this. Trust us on this, because they get a bit mischievous sometimes. And so she says, well, I'm still going to do it. And she didn't tell them. And she created a Friar Tuck Topa, thinking that Friar Tuck was part of the Robin Hood's men. He's going to be okay. He's a monk. He'll be all right. Except Robin Hood's gang was a gang of thieves. And so he ran amok and started causing problems in the villagers. The villagers were experiencing him too. And the monks had to come in and dissolve him because he was just getting out of control. I find that interesting. What is that? Is that a ghost? Is that a non-human intelligence? Think and Grow Rich. You can do it with people that are past. And so I can make an argument, well, maybe you tapped into their spirit or their personality or their archetype. What if we're all archetypes? There's a question for you. Or is this something the brain made up and it just made it accessible through our brain? Okay, well, I guess that would still be human then, because it's inside our brain and it's brain driven. I don't know. Here's the Red Book, Carl Jung. If you haven't read this, Courtney, I do recommend it. Using active imagination and protocols that look a lot like the Invisible Counselor Technique and the Topomancy Technique, He came up with this guy called Philemon, which he would swear is his spirit guide. Now, he hallucinated this guy as if he was really there, and his family decided not to publish this book for like 20 years for fear he would be considered crazy. But what if that is the normal way of being and we're just not teaching people to engage it? I don't expect you to know this one. This is the one that nobody knew out of the 25 folks. This is part of the Philip the Ghost experiment. So some of these folks are medium and some of them are scientists. And the scientists wanted to know if we created a ghost, a completely fictitious character, would they be able to channel him? Well, they went and they created this story that this guy was dead because of murder and was probably a murderer himself, and they gave him all this history, and the mediums channeled him. So now you got to wonder, did they create this person like a Topa, like a Philemon, like an invisible counselor, or was there a ghost listening and says, yeah, I'm going to play along with this? Or ghosts have access to all that information. He doesn't have to play along. He could read the script as it's being invented in his real time, which is not necessarily our real time. Or, I guess telepathy is an argument. Maybe because the experimenters were present, the mediums were telepathically getting the information from one of the participants. It just defies explanation, and quite frankly, we don't know enough, and we're not trying to know enough. But if all of those are real, and this new protocol, which is probably not a new protocol, I think there's like multiple versions out there somewhere, at least in rumor I've heard that. CE5 is where humans are going out in groups to summon UFOs to them. I'm okay with that. That's a scientific experiment at least, and I hear some scientists saying probably not a wise thing, you don't know what you're calling, and that's fair, but how else do you do science if you don't try something? Do you know that?
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, you're scared of that? So this is a planchette, part of a Ouija board. And so does this work by consciousness, like our subconscious is pushing this, or are there entities involved? And if entities are involved, doesn't that mean they're around us all the time, whether we have that board or not? And this is just a vehicle that allows us to kind of tap into that. Is it the same as CE5? Well, they're not using a tool. They're just using their mind. And do we need a tool if we can use our mind? I don't know. I'm always fascinated that I can find a perfectly scientific atheistic person, and they ain't touching that. And I'm like, but you don't believe. Why don't we do? He says, maybe I don't believe, but you just don't open doors that you don't know what's there. I'm like, you're not a scientist then. It kind of reminds me of a heart. It looks like an upside down heart, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of looks like this Masonic symbol with the eye on the top of a pyramid, don't you think? I don't know. Kind of looks like this Star Trek pen.
Oh my goodness.
Well, what is the pen?
A
It's a communicator.
Oh, communicate.
It's a medium.
Because they would touch it and talk, right?
Yeah. Beam me up.
Yeah.
All right, so this is Loxy, or a representation of her. And this is my Topa. And I'm going to tell you this story. The first time I heard her voice, and mind you, you know how tangential I am. And so I'm having these, I constructed the magic and mystery topomancy ritual. I've connected it with active imagination and the invisible counselor technique. And John is pretty tangential, and we get these really elaborate stories, and it's kind of crazy, right? And so I asked a question, and I start to get the story, and I stop her, and I'm like, hey, hold on. I want to go from point A to point B this time in the shortest direct route possible, no tangents, just straight. And as clear as you're talking to me, Courtney, the first words were, lightning never takes a straight path, and it lights the whole sky. First thing that happened was I came out of my chair, because I could have sworn someone was standing behind me. And then I started unpacking that and how meaningful that statement was. That was like Rumi talking about, oh, I don't know, of course we're all broken, that's how the light gets in. And so I started thinking about Joe versus the volcano and the importance of this lightning strike, which kind of reminds me of that Maria lightning strike. Probably not, but I'm thinking about this because of that statement. And so the path of this movie opens up with them walking this long, crooked path. And that path is the lightning strike that looks like the logo on the door and on the symbol of their shirt. And this door opens up. So the lightning opens a door, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
also the path up the volcano in which he jumps in. It's symbolic. It's a meme. It's this way of conveying messages across time. Um, in that movie, there were people that were playing more than one character. So Meg Ryan plays 3 different characters, and you'll find other people in there, bit characters that are playing other bit characters. But that symbol is in in movies everywhere. So right above the one on the wall, which is still art that you can get, there's Grey No More is a character that he hits the wall and that lightning pattern appears. The lightning that sinks the boat, that's the same pattern. It just reminds me of this Maria Orsnick girl, but maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm just putting things together that aren't there because that's what John does. So back to Loxie. She said, let's do the invisible counselor technique. And if you do it by the book, you're supposed to invite 12 people to come and visit with you. I brought in 7. I thought if I'm going to be crazy, I'm going to be half crazy. So I brought in Carl Jung. You'll find overlap in some ways because they all have a spiritual dimension with them. Nikola Tesla, I figured I needed an engineer, and why not him? Jackie Chan, I needed some strength, but you need humor with strength so that it's tempered. And so I thought he was the perfect. And so I've got 2, one guy that's alive. We got like 3 that are dead. Technically, Uhura is also, or Nichelle Nichols is also dead, but I chose the Uhura, which is the fictional character, to see if there's a difference between fictional character versus person. And it may not be fictional enough because I have a live person standing, and Nicole could still kind of maybe stand in if there's that interface somehow. Sacagawea, and then the goddess Isis. And Spock is holding Isis, the cat. And that's why I want to know what Russell Targ's cat's name is. So I opened this up with, I don't practice Santeria. Well, I'm practicing some magic for sure. But the DSM-5 is not magic, and I ain't got no crystal ball. But did you know all of these things here? DNA, Einstein, Frankenstein, the period, all of these things came in dreams. Why do we tell people not to daydream? Why do we tell them to forget their dreams and not put any emphasis on it? All the good stuff comes from the right side of the brain. Imagination is more important than knowledge. It's everything. You ready? It's going to start getting faster. The section's smaller, and we're going to be done before too long. So telepathy, is it biologically induced, spiritually induced, technologically induced? Well, I got news for you. There's technology today that can read your mind. You can buy these earbuds. You put them in your ear, and your boss will know whether you're doing your job, you're surfing the net, gossiping with friends, on the phone. They can tell what you're doing. And if they had this today, doesn't that mean that people, the military, which is 50 to 100 years ahead of us, already had this technology? And so all those people that are putting those tinfoil hats on may have been right. Just saying. Stanley Krippner, he did a lot of dream studies and a lot of esoteric paranormal studies. I actually had a correspondence with him real quick when I started dabbling in topomancy. Very interesting guy. But he did this dream study with the Grateful Dead. They put up pictures behind the Grateful Dead concert as it's playing, trying to determine whether or not these images would be transmitted to people that weren't there. And it's kind of interesting. Scientists do actually study this stuff, even though the academics say that they don't. They say they don't because they want funding to keep coming in, so you don't want your funding disrupted. But there's a few brave souls that they don't care what you think of them. Rupert Sheldrake is one of these. He started with this idea that people can determine whether or not they're being stared at, and many people have had that experience. He's also noted that there are people that seem to know who's calling before they pick up the phone, and that's back in the day when we had rotary and not cell phones. But they fixed it where they could do a study using cell phones by blocking the caller ID and then seeing if that sense is really there. Statistically, it seems like there's something to it. They also studied pets seem to know when people are coming home before even if it's not on schedule, the pet will go to the door like 5 minutes before you arrive in anticipation of your arrival. Japan figured out we can record dreams in an fMRI. And so if we can record your dreams and play it back like a movie, why can't aliens who are probably thousands of years ahead of us do that? And or not even wait for us to dream, they can put something in our mind using technology. And so we see Bigfoot because that's what they want us to see, so we don't come closer because we're afraid of Bigfoot. Dean Radin was also involved with the Psychic Spy Stargate program, and in this book, he talks about real magic. And there's some exercises in here. You can do your own research and determine whether or not it's useful. Russell Targ, do you see what I see? Here's Ingo Swann, and I recommend some of his books. My two favorites are Penetration and Psychic Sexuality. They both kind of map out the world in a new way of seeing, and it's from the perspective of a psychic. All right. Do you know who this is?
Is that from the movie? Was it the one with the apes?
No, it's not Planet of the Apes, but good guess. This is a popular meme, though, and so the first human was supposedly named Lucy, and this is supposed to be a representation of her based on the remains that they found. If you didn't get it, this was supposed to be your help. Do you know this movie?
Yes.
Did you like it? You're going really slow with that. Yes.
Was it Lucy?
Yeah.
Lucy? Okay. Yeah, I did like it.
It was pretty good.
And
so at the end of this movie, she goes back in time and she touches Lucy. Is that the future again informing the past? Isn't that an interesting concept? Now, I don't guess you'll get this, but this is a drawing of a UFO, and it's a famous one in Texas, the Cash Landrum incident, and these folks got irradiated by the UFO. There's a pattern here, and I'm hoping you'll see it. This is another UFO from England, and there's a Harrier in the background. It's a diamond-shaped UFO. Not hearing it yet, but that's okay. But this is not happenstance or tangential. I'm going to line it up here in a second. I'm going to introduce you first to Corey Goode. He invented this story called 20 and Back, in which the Space Force is in space, they do time travel, and they recruit people from the population, and they take them into space. You serve a 20-year mission with a promise that you're going to get a paycheck. And at the end of your duty, they erase your brain, and they put mind wipes on you, and then they regress you back to the age at which they abducted you and put you back in the population, and you live your life as if you would have had you not been abducted into Space Force. Interesting story, huh? Some people heard the story and they started claiming, yeah, I was part of that program too. And so a number of folks jumped up and said, yeah, me too. And they told similar stories. And Corey Goode got mad and started suing people, saying, no, this is fiction. I made it all up. You can't take it as mine. And so I'd say he's probably about my age. I don't know that for sure. I'm not that particular about finding every fact about people. But I will tell you this. I think I'm part of the program, and I don't think he invented it all, and I'm going to prove it to you now. This image is Lucy in the sky with diamonds. That's why I lined those other people up. Lucy, diamonds, and I'm bringing that to you so we can introduce you to this song. You know that? Technically, this is not the song. This is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's the first flying sub that I ever saw, short of the Yellow Submarine. All right. So, what's up with the Yellow Submarine? And why does that look like a UFO? Is that a meme? Are they telling us something? And so, Everything you see in 20 and Back can be found in the 1968 movie The Yellow Submarine by the Beatles. Yellow Submarine is the first Navy vessel to go into space. Per UFO lore, the Navy was the first people to go into space. They put an anti-gravity machine on a submarine and they took it into orbit. All right. Per this, we were in space in 1924, and the first man on the moon was in 1955, not 1969. Further, they traveled through time. Time is relative, it's all over the place. And as they're flying, they are getting older. And then they get regressed back to their original age. They're fighting reptilians. I don't know why they invoked the 7th Cavalry. Those guys weren't really nice, but they brought them along. And then the blue meanies in UFO lore are the medics, and in near-death experiences, they're the healers. So there's some consistency across domains, and so it just makes you wonder, why is this guy crying? What did he do with the 7th Cavalry? Did he kill the Martians? I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. Except they did invoke the meme of Ahab, the white whale. Why did they do that? And of course, you can't do that without introducing Star Trek again. And here's the meme that connects him to Ahab. And is this soft disclosure kind of stuff? Do you know this picture?
Yes.
Yeah, you better. This is the original Star Trek, Captain Kirk, Uhura. And this is the first interracial kiss on television.
Yes.
Yes. The script was awful for this one. But what interesting came out of this was this song by the Beatles. So they were watching this on television from their hotel room, and they kiss, and apparently John Lennon or someone said, you go, girl, or you go, Blackbird. They didn't say girl, Blackbird, that's the English way of saying it. And to involve a little mystery here, supposedly Paul McCartney died in 66. What happened to his face? I don't know if that's real. People push it as real, and there's this debate. Something weird is happening. But what if they were part of the 20 and Back program and he just didn't come back? What if they were part of the 20 and Back program and the compensation for them was to be rich and famous? And if time is messed with, there's this thing called the Mandela effect, where people remember things that aren't accurate. And so, do you remember Monopoly? Does he have the monocle or no monocle?
I can't remember. From what I remember, he had the monocle.
Yeah, I remember him with the monocle. And if you look at it, there's not one there. And it's an interesting thing. Do we remember what we remember, or what we're told to remember, or what we tell ourselves to remember? Do we suck at math because we say we suck at math? Your brain should still be able to do math. There's not a special math center of your brain, right? Hypnosis works because we're told to do something. TV programming, it's called programming for a reason. We are influenced by commercials to purchase things. The store arrangements are placed in such a way as to influence our buying. Are we really who we think we are, and are we really in control of ourselves? I don't know, it's just something to think about. So, sorry, that was a hard transition. I'm not asking if you want to go. I'm trying to push through, so I'm not keeping you forever. So this is particles and a picture of an atom. Do you think it's alive?
Yes.
You do? Where did you hear that? Or are you saying yes because of me?
So hold on. This is an atom.
Yep.
I'm trying to remember from school.
So school would tell you no, it's not alive.
No. Okay. No.
All right. Native Americans would tell you everything's alive. All right. And so again, if the particles knows they're being observed, doesn't that suggest that they're intelligent? But get this, scientists are now saying that they communicate. maybe not the way we're even talking about. Maybe it's just transferring information from one to another, but they influence the other atoms around them. So what is that? Is that consciousness at some level? All right. Now I've just got questions. Um, and so if it is true that they do communicate and there's something to that, why do we get so upset when Japanese scientist Emoto suggests that you can transfer meaning, your emotions, into a liquid like water? And so he froze water while thinking loving thoughts and and mean thoughts, and you got two different shaped crystals. I find that interesting, and you couple that with somatics and these plates where you can put sand or a medium on a plate. Every sound and every frequency has its own pattern. Um, and I think substrate also influences. So if you got a particular grain of sand, that will show a certain pattern, and then you might not see that with the others. I'm not quite sure about that, but it seems like material and frequency both create patterns for sure, and that seems meaningful. You can't dismiss sound as doing things to us. Um, Here we are again with the double slit, and you got this person animated looking away, and you got the interference pattern, and then when you look, you get the photons. All right. They've done this again, but now they're seeing evidence that it's not just with light, but time itself is a wave or a particle. You get the same interference pattern. Um, and when you couple that with the fact they have this new thing that they've discovered, time crystals, where these crystals don't just oscillate in the present, they oscillate forwards and backwards through time. So if you have this crystal, and this crystal is a certain length for 50 years past and 50 years forwards, that oscillation goes through the entire crystal structure temporally, not just the length of the crystal. It's a four-dimensional piece of matter. That means the future people holding that crystal should be able to communicate to the people in the past. But how do we not believe in telepathy at this point? This is a virus. In the old days, viruses were just random bits of floating RNA. But in order for viruses to exist, they needed a host cell. You needed a full cell. But scientists think that it's because of viruses that cells evolved. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know. Plasma or this is a cell. This is a living cell, and this picture hasn't changed since I've seen it in high school, and I took a human physiology and anatomy course, and so this picture hasn't changed. But we do know that our understanding of the cell has changed. Studying live cells under a functional magnetic resonance imaging, an fMRI, they have found twice the number of functional artifacts in cells. We don't see what we think we see. In fact, to even see in a cell, you have to kill the cell, put it on a slide, and you have to stain it. And the stain that you use determines what artifacts you will see. And so if some of these things can only be seen in a living cell while the cell is moving stuff around, and you see where it congels, well, that's why we're not seeing the whole universe. Because if you think of it this way too, the universe supposedly is 90% dark energy or dark matter, and only 4% is physical matter as we understand it. But when we look at the images of deep space, what we're seeing are photographs. We're seeing pictures taken now that represent what it was in the past, because the light took however long it took to get here. And so we're seeing the past, but we're not seeing real-time images of all the structures that could exist in and around us. And we're not even counting in that usually the electromagnetic stuff, and that's moving all the time too. So this is an image of a brain cell and an image of cosmic structures. They look exactly the same. Now, it would probably be unreasonable to infer they do exactly the same, but the esoteric literature is very clear. Same above, same below. And so, this is a fungus that took over an ant. It hijacked this ant, drove it up a tree, parked it, consumed it, and recreated its life cycle there. So, how does something that's smaller than the host tell the host what to do? Doesn't that denote some kind of intelligence? I mean, it popped into its brain and took over. Does it see what the ant sees, or does it trust the ant to just go where it goes once it starts simulating stuff? I don't know. Those are the kind of questions I like to ask. It was found that mushrooms have like 50 words. Well, I don't know how to interpret that other than they have language, and if you have language, doesn't that denote some kind of intelligence? There is a parasite that will get into a mouse, and it will make the mouse fearless and drive that mouse up to a cat. The cat then eats the mouse, and the parasite completes its life cycle in the gut of the cat. How do you get creatures like that? And are they more intelligent than the host? I mean, you'd have to know something about the host in order to get it to do what you need it to do, right? Do you know the skinny on these two mice? No. So there's this thing that's going on, and it's gotten more elaborate since I first discovered it. They could irradiate mice, and so let's say you take this fat mouse, and you irradiate it, and you do a fecal transplant from the skinny mouse. So you take the poop from the skinny mouse, you put it in the fat mouse becomes skinny. All right? You can do it the other way around. You can take the skinny mouse, irradiate it, kill all the bacteria that's in it, and you can take the poop from the fat mouse and give it to the skinny mouse, and the skinny mouse will become fat. If this was aggressive, non-aggressive, it works the same way. So the aggressive can be non-aggressive if you give it the bacteria from the non-aggressive mouse and vice versa. They have reversed aging in mice. You take an old mouse, irradiate it, and give it the young poop, and its skin literally looks 30 years younger, or the equivalent, because they can do this with humans and they're projecting, right? And dementia and aging-related illnesses reverse. That's been measured. And so we dismiss bacteria, but we live with them all the time. We have flora and fauna on us, and they determine our health, and they determine our moods. And maybe we're not thinking about depression right because it may have nothing to do with serotonin level. It may be what's in our guts. And maybe they're unhappy because we're not eating right or doing things right. May not be us at all. Just a thought. Scientists have discovered bugs actually may have more going on than what we thought were going on. No? That's interesting. Flies have anxiety. If a fly bumping into a window can't get out, it has a little bit of anxiety. But if it sees a whole bunch of dead flies on the windowsill, its anxiety goes up. I don't know how they measure that. Does it make more noise? It get more frustrated? It hits its head more often? I don't know. But they're saying that. The scientists are saying that. Plants have a lot more going on than we've ever thought. They communicate with each other. They share nutrients underneath the soil. They can distinguish between kin and non-kin, and in droughts they may share more with their kin than another tree. They share immune systems. If you kill the elder tree, you'll lose whole swaths of forest because the young ones rely on the elders. If a young sapling pops up and it's in the shade, the surrounding trees will move their limbs so sunlight can get down to the sapling. They make noise. If you hurt it or twist it, it makes a noise that can be heard, but humans mostly need microphone equipment to make it audible. That suggests something. They don't like being messed with, and if they're afraid, they make noise. Which brings me to Clive Baxter. Back in the 70s, he was hooking them up with lie detector tests, and he would threaten them. and they would show a response. That's not so hokey. After all, this new research suggests there's more going on with the plants than what we thought. We may need to revisit this guy, because not only did he discover that plants responded to what you say, they responded to what you think. And so he could think, well, I'm going to burn this plant, and the plant would respond, and it showed up on the lie detector. And if he kept making that same thought, the plant would finally chill out and say, like, oh, you're just full of smoke, you're not doing anything. If you cooked a lobster live next to the plant spiked all the graphs, looked like it was responding to something that was in pain. That's interesting. They took pieces of the plant and put it in a petri dish and hooked that part of the plant up to the cells, up to a lie detector, and they hurt the plant, and the lie detector still went off because the cells seemed to receive information from the plant. That's interesting. Is that because the plant's everything that was a part of the plant was entangled, and so it's still wirelessly sharing information? They decided, Clive decided to do this with humans, and so they took some cells from a human and put them in a petri dish and hooked them up to a lie detector, and if they poked the human, the lie detector went off. Didn't matter where that person was in New York, the cells responded instantaneously at the same time as the guy being poked. How do we not believe in telepathy? The divided mind and the heart's code addresses this to some degree. I really like the divided mind because it gives techniques for how you can communicate with your unconsciousness to decrease symptoms that may be psychosomatically induced. And then the heart's code, they talk about heart transplants being, you can donate your heart and people will have your memories. And that seems to have been the case, and it's documented in this. But there's a doctor in here that goes a little bit further. He says it's not just hearts, it's all tissue transplants. Even blood transfusions can result in memory transference. Memory is not limited or local to the brain, as evidenced by epigenetics, where people from the Holocaust came out of the Holocaust with PTSD. Some of those folks married, they had kids, their kids had PTSD. Their grandkids had PTSD. Their great-grandkids had PTSD. With each generation, it was a little less. It just makes you wonder, though. If someone came in and married someone and they had more trauma, it would amp up. And so we're transmitting stuff that may not be verbally transmitted. This lady here, I like the dodo. If you like animal videos, this is a great channel to watch. And this lady would take the hooks that were stuck in sharks' mouths out, and to her surprise, they showed gratitude when you did that. How is that not, if not intelligence, at least sentience? You have to know yourself and other, and that there's this thing that the other did for you that you would show gratefulness for. I don't know how to think about it in any other way. And so this image is of an octopus that was rescued by a fisherman. It was missing one of its legs, and it brought it to a scientist, and they were doing studies on it. They weren't hurting it. It had free roam in this cage. But what they noticed was sometimes it would discharge ink while it was sleeping, which suggested that it was having a nightmare. And they do know it lost its leg, and they infer from that this animal was having a PTSD response to a negative past event. Dolphins have names for themselves. They call them echo signal something, echo, I forget what they call it, but they didn't call it a name. I don't know why they don't just own up and say they have names for themselves. They have individual names, they have group names, as evidenced by they can hunt, and the lead hunter can tell one to go one way and three to go the other way, and so they can make distinctions between name, and so it's really interesting like on that. But they also have their own language. You can't take a dolphin from this pod in the Atlantic, fly it over to the Pacific and drop it off into a pod and expect it to get along. It'd be like dropping an English only speaking in Russia. There's just not going to be any correspondence. This dog, Chaser, he knows 1,022 nouns, and he's capable of learning more. He can be tasked to find something new. The smartest dog ever. How are they not sentient? And my favorite, Coco the gorilla. So,
Sign language.
Coco, yeah, she was pretty smart. And she abstracted. And so she saw a cat on television. She asked for a cat, and they talked about it, and they gave her a cat, and they got along fine until the cat died. It was run over at the park by a golf cart, and they told Coco, and Coco was sad and communicated that sadness. That seems significant. They got her a new cat, and they went on with that. But Coco met Robin Williams. She seemed to like Robin Williams, but I don't know if she liked him as much or equal to Mr. Rogers. I will tell you this, she watched Mr. Rogers every day. And so when Mr. Rogers heard that she watched his show, he asked if he could come see her. The very first thing she did was grab him up in a hug and take his shoes off. How is that not abstraction and understanding relationship from television? And that's intelligence. So there's this thing known as the morphogenic field, where there were these islands of monkeys, and they're separated, and researchers would drop sweet potatoes off, and one of them figured out that it didn't like the sand, and it washed it off, and then everyone on its island started doing it, and then after about 100 monkeys washing them, suddenly all the monkeys on all the islands were washing their potatoes, even though they were out of line of sight of the ones that were washing their potatoes. And so this concept of a morphogenic field came up, suggesting that there's more ways to transfer information, and that would be consistent with Carl Jung's collective unconscious. This orangutan has been seen spearfishing, probably emulating local spearfishers. But is that how we all start? And maybe Planet of the Apes got it wrong. Humans advance, and we leave this planet, and then we help them the next cycle up. And so, I don't know, I'm really just thinking outside the box on that one. This introduces the morphogenic field, that all living organisms operate within this field. Doesn't that sound like the Force from Star Wars? Just saying. Is it real? I don't know. But I tell you this, archetypes require a medium such as the collective unconscious in order to perpetuate the memes. They need a field to be functional. And so the question would be, does each species have their own distinct domain field? I don't know. How are you hanging in there? We're almost done.
Okay.
Okay, you're ready to go. This is it. All right, so the Global Consciousness Project. This is a thing that they hooked random number generators up to computers, and they determined whether consciousness was affecting reality by noting whether or not number generators stopped being random. And they discovered that is true. Right before major events like 9/11 and Fukushima, all their number generators ceased producing random numbers and started similar numbers, and it happened 15 minutes prior to the event. That suggests that something was transmitted backwards in time that correlated with the event. They haven't figured out how to put it with the event. They just know that something's going to happen when the number generators stop being random. All right. These folks are they're a band, and they requested an album cover. And this guy said, "Well, I just dreamed of the World Trade Center blowing up. Let's give you that one." And so he does this, and the next day the World Trade Center come down. They pulled this album cover. They didn't want that. This cartoon book was 1950s The Face on Mars, which correlates to NASA's Face on Mars. And so you've got to ask yourself, is this soft disclosure? Is this accidental remote viewing? Or did NASA really know there was a face on Mars? Because there's people on Mars. The Wreck of the Titan. Morgan Robertson wrote this book, 20 years before the Titanic sunk? How did he do that? And it's a play-by-play. It got everything except that actor. What's his name? Come on, help me.
I'm trying. Hold on. Like I can see his face, but
All right, well, we'll leave that fellow. He died anyway. Let him rest. All right. Lucid Dreams and Nightmares showed this video with Leonard Skinner album. Um, the first album cover had this fire going on, but one of the ladies said, "I don't want to get on this airplane. It's going to crash." And everyone said, "It's not going to crash. Come on." She didn't go, but the plane crashed, and some of them didn't survive. And some people, well, they changed that album cover after that. Dinar Kuntz seemed to know about the Wuhan lab and an RDNA like virus thing and all of this. How does he do this unless it's self-disclosure or it's accidental remote viewing? All right, Eureka. This is a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, and he predicts. He doesn't predict. He's telling there's cosmic structures in the universe that he shouldn't have known at his time, and he's not the only poem that has done this, and maybe that's why so many scientists quote people from the Eastern religions. But this is the most interesting one. This story has a ship that went down and 4 people survived. They ate a turtle, but running out of food, they decide to draw straws and they eat this one guy, the youngest one on the thing, and then 40 years later, it happens in real life. And I'm telling you, if I ever know anyone named Richard Parker, I'm not letting them get on a ship. I'm just not. And if you want more stories like this, Anthony Peake writes a lot of these stories, and they're pretty good. Mm-hmm. Not only is the universe stranger than you think, it's stranger than we can think. We don't know half of it. And that's all.
Cool.
Any thoughts before you depart into your, I gotta go and drink something because there's too much information in my head?
I think I would condense it down a little.
Yeah, it needs to be condensed. Well, I'm going to break it up into sections. The first time I did it was an hour and a half, and then, yeah, there's just so much that's tied together into this thing that suggests that there's more going on than what we allow.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I do appreciate you spending time with me.
Yeah, I liked it.
Well, thank you.
But it's kind of like, I don't have ADHD, but I start getting fidgety. Like I gotta move. And then my son came in twice, so I'm like, oh my gosh.
Now imagine what I do with Emily every morning. I walk into the office and I sit there and we start blowing up. It's because I've been doing this for like an hour before I get to work in my head. And of course, I really am tangential.
But it was really good.
Well, thank you. I'll get you a copy of it, and I guess I will see you tomorrow at work.
Alrighty. Be careful coming in, because, the
rain?
The eclipse.
Oh, the eclipse is not going to stop me from driving.
Yeah,
unless
all
there's
the people
car accidents.
coming. All the people coming here.
Unless there's that plague and the locust and the demons that are unlocked, and the giants in the giant land over there. You haven't heard about that, have you? You better go before I start you down another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Tell your husband hi and give the little one a hug.
All right.
Bye.
Yes. Bye.